Okay guys, I finally got my Happymodel hardware, so let's have a look at it. I'm not going to go through any flashing or testing, but I am going to link a flashing tutorial by Kaiju in the description. I've got some test videos of the DIY PPs, and later on I'll put another one up for the Happymodel, but I'm going to link Spec, who has a lot of testing around garage, long range, all these things. It's really good, so go check out his testing if you're concerned about anything about penetration or range. So starting with the good stuff. So these are the DIY PPs that started this off, and this is how you could order them. And Happymodel asked if they could manufacture some, so for sure I went no worries. So on the PP you have a STM32L4 on the back. Now this is great, this is also bad. So you won't actually find any more PPs after this first batch. The STM chips are becoming very hard to find. So there won't be any more of these for a while until we get over this chip shortage. But anyway, STM on the back, we've got a SX1280 on the front, XO, little filter in here, and our wonderful SMD antenna. We call them ceramics, but they're not actually ceramic in any way. They're a sort of plastic, and they can melt with a hot air gun or soldering iron if you hit them. So just be a little bit careful there. And that's it. She's incredibly small, but it does have, we made all the pads edge pads, which makes it great for just soldering onto headers and removal if you need to. It does have what I'm calling fake castellation. So on the edge pads there is no plating. Same with the DIY. It's actually very expensive to get done, so I understand why they didn't do it. And I even see it on the FetTech gear as well. So that's not an issue. Here we've got the EP1. And on the back we have an ESP MCU. So these are the guys you'll find being manufactured more now. Once again, edge pads, you can flash this via pass-through. Alessandra is actually working on a method where you don't need to press a button or jump these two little pads down here to do this pass-through. So at the moment you can do flashing via Wi-Fi, and there's a tiny little Wi-Fi antenna down here. If you need to do an emergency UART or pass-through flash, you can jump these two pads and do that. With the next release, you won't have to push any buttons. You can just plug into your flight controller with USB and hit flash, and away it goes. This one here uses an external antenna, so if you do want a full range antenna, you can whack it on and away you go. A little annoyance with this one, they put the LED on the bottom. Typically you'd mount this way, particularly with the EP2. The LED is here on the bottom, and you'd mount it this way so your antenna is on top. So it'd be great if they could move that to the top. Looking at all these under the scope, I did find some of the passive components were a little bit misaligned or touching each other, so they'd move during the soldering and the reflow. And it wasn't too much of a concern. Anything that's touching is already joined on the traces, so no, that's okay. All of the passives were there, nothing fell out separate out of the packaging. One other thing I want to talk about with these guys, on the PP, they did add some tiny little pads. Let me see if I can, it's going to be hard to show you guys. So just here above the 5-volt pad, there's two tiny pads just here, and there's another two just around the other side of the XO. So these were pads, they're just in case the XO here needed a couple of capacitors, but it doesn't need them, so I've asked them to remove it. That's important because I had an issue with one of these where it stopped working. It took about 15 minutes to realise I got a little bit of solder between these two pads, and that meant this XO stopped working. So while it would boot up, the LED would flash, the SX1280 wasn't working. but a bit of flux and the soldering irons clear that solder away off these two pads, and it was good to go again. So just be very careful if you run into trouble soldering and if it's not working for whatever reason. Okay, on to the transmitter. So the transmitter is based on the DIY ESP32 with the E28 module. Here we have our microcontroller. This is the ESP32 controlling everything. We've got a SX1280 over here, our transceiver, the RF amp, and our UFL. This guy up here is an extra ESP, we're calling it the backpack. So this is going to allow us to have Wi-Fi communication either between your laptop if you want to do some data logging, or between, say, your video module in the future, and there's plans for just having communication between multiple devices. And this is sort of future-proofing the hardware. When you get it, you have this pin header, and there's a couple of jumpers here, and they arrive with them on the middle pins. We can see on the side here, this is connecting the USB to the ESP01F, which is this guy. So this is allowing pass-through from the USB to each of the components. You put on the bottom two here, so it's USB to ESP32, will allow you to use USB flashing. So in the configurator, if you choose the Happymodel TX UART upload target, you can flash it through here, and you can see I've got my jumpers on the bottom two, so I can flash it directly with USB. If you want to flash the backpack, you can move it to the middle two and flash it. And to allow communication between these two, if we're using the backpack to receive things like changing your VTX channel, you move the jumpers to the bottom. Long term, it'd be great to just leave these on the top, so these two are always connected, and then these two can be flashed independently using Wi-Fi. It is capable up to 250 milliwatts, just like the E28. I had it running on the bench then. I was just looking at the power output. It does get warm. I'm not aware of any reported issues of it having problems cutting out like the R9 with the increased heat load. Whether or not that happens in the future, I don't know. We'll say it is very thin, so there would be nothing to stop us from putting a fan inside the case and actually circulating some air around this to remove that heat. The RX antennas, so you get these with your EP2. They're flimsy. They probably will break like ghosts and also tracer antennas. These two, one was tuned a little bit high and one was tuned a little bit low. I still would recommend, if you have the ability to tune your antennas, to buy these larger chunky R9 antennas, or R9, just chunkier 900 megahertz antennas from AliExpress. They're about $4 each, and you can cut them down. And you can see on the transmitter, so the transmitter antenna, oh wow, that looks very familiar. And they have in fact just cut down their 900 antenna. This guy was tuned a little bit high, about 100 megahertz, so the null point wasn't sitting right in the 2.4 range we want to see. But as it is, I wouldn't really trust any antenna unless you've got something to check it.